Right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Richard Taverner. I'm chair of the Herts Beds Construction Excellence Club. And this afternoon, we're very fortunate, I think, to have Kevin Thomas come along and give his presentation. A couple of things just before we start. Kevin's going to talk, I think, for probably about half an hour, something like that. That's a bit more. And then we'll open up some questions afterwards. If during the presentation you want to put some questions into the chat, we can then see those questions come up, and there's an opportunity during the presentations. We may take one or two questions, but then it will give us something to kind of talk through at the end of Kevin's presentation. So to introduce Kevin, Kevin Thomas is a coach, mentor, facilitator, and a change agent. He is a founding director of IP Initiatives and co-creator of the IP delivery model. As a former public and private sector client, Kevin has a wealth of experience in the built environment design, construction, operation and regeneration, from board level strategy to hands-on projects and facilities management. Kevin created the award-winning fusion approach for Glaxo in the early 90s, led the development of the Strategic Forum's Integration Toolkit, and has been chair of the Construction Excellence Collaborative Working Champions since their formation in 2003. I've known Kevin for many years, and he's been an active member of the Herts Beds Construction Excellence Club from its formation. And we also worked together on a collaborative project with some members of the club a few years ago, very successfully. So following that introduction, Kevin, over to you.
Well, thank you for that, Richard. Okay, well, I don't need to say anything about who I am. Richard said it all, so I'll just bung some slides on screen. And we'll go from there.
You've gone to your, there we go, here it comes.
Yeah, just
brilliant.
Change it over. Right, so you should be on full screen. Yep, everybody see the screen? Good. Okay, so this IPI model, you may or may have not heard about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to assume that you know nothing. And take you through, in principle, what we've tried to make it do and what it has been doing. And if I insult your intelligence on the way, I apologise in advance. I love construction, but I have to say that when I started out, my first experiences were, this isn't quite what I expected. Are you sure this is the right way to do it? And ever since then, I've been struggling with, surely this is not the right way to do it, and ultimately how can we do it differently? So I'm going to take you on a little bit of that journey with me. Now, everybody has probably seen a slide of this type, so let me just remind ourselves what it says. On the left hand side, you've got this blue curve, which is the ability to change things, and that means influence as well. And on the right hand side, which is orange on my screen, is a cost of making those changes. And at the bottom it says a historic project stages, because actually that's what we wrote in the Strategic Forum Integration Toolkit, that we really shouldn't be following these stages, but often we still are. And they run through the traditional, from briefing and feasibility all the way to implementation. When you understand this, then you start to position where the industry is, and a few things start to come home. So those of you who are in the design community will recognise that you're generally appointed first, and you get a lot of chance to talk about the requirements of the project and think about how things might be done and come up with outline designs. Those of you who are at the delivery end generally find that you don't get involved until right at the end, when it's actually pretty much all being agreed in, certainly in concept and often in detail, or you might hope it's agreed in detail. It might not be agreed as much detail as you thought, and it's your responsibility to implement that. And that separation has caused us all lots of problems. As an industry, we have been trying to do something about that, and watch the animation. We've been trying to bring the delivery teams together with the design teams, but something seems to stop us. We never seem to quite get to a point where we can bring the delivery teams right in at the start. And what stops us is a number of things, some structural and some more cultural, particularly things like the procurement regulations, which are now written around the process that we've got rather than the process that might be ideal. But it's also prevented by customer practice. We've all got so used to doing it this way that actually we've become very resistant to do something differently. But there's more than that, because actually we have some real structural issues, things that have now come into force that reflect the way the industry is and actually make it hard to make those changes. So if you're a designer, and funnily enough, we nearly had a discussion about it a few seconds ago, you will be appointed under a service contract and you will have your own PI insurance. And yes, we probably will touch on the nightmare of PI insurance more than once during this presentation. If you're on the delivery side, you'll have a different form of contract, a delivery form of contract, and you'll have a constructional risk and a third-party liability insurance that's designed to cover the issues around building something. And those two insurances insist that there's a responsibility transfer one to the other. So actually, they now act as a brake on any early contractual involvement and early involvement we might want to have. So in our world, we've got to get rid of this stuff because actually what we really need is integration. And so what we've done is we've taken away the separate contracts and we've taken away the separate insurances. And now we don't have those separate contracts and insurances and the desire and the requirement to hand over responsibility. We can bring the delivery team right in with the design team. And that's what we do. We bring everybody together right at the beginning. And then we provide an alliance contract which supports the entire team from cradle to grave. And we have an integrated insurance product that supports the whole team from cradle to grave. So that's a fundamental transition that we've been taking the industry through. By the way, if you suddenly see me looking over here, it's not because I've got a crick in the neck. I've got some notes on the other screen. You probably won't you probably won't see much of that because I'm not very good at remembering to read my own notes. For us, it's about creating this this three-tier mapping here. You've got to align a team. And the only way to align a team is through a single contract that really has everybody working under the same methodology. And so we have a single alliance contract to do that. And then I've just said that we want a single integrated insurance. And in the heart of all of that, where they all overlap, you get this integrated project insurance model, in which actually we have a no blame collaborative culture because there is no rights to sue, there is no legal and forensic costs, no rights for subrogation. You might hear this being called insurance-backed alliancing. Can you see the picture that I'm moving around? Because it's right in the middle of my slides. I don't know how to get rid of it. Stick it on the other screen. There we go. And our integrated project insurance model is what we hope will just be the first in this new generation of different types of delivery. At the moment, it's the only one. There isn't anybody else out there doing anything like this. So let me talk a bit about how that process works, what makes it fundamentally different. So the first big decision that people make is, do I want to stick with traditional or do I want to do something else? I mean, it would be nice if people made that decision. The reality is we just generally drift into the first. But if you decide you don't want to go in an IPI way, then what you're probably going to do is procure a design team to develop the solution, and that solution will then be used to procure the delivery team. And if you're a client, you might hope that the designers are novated, are retained by the delivery partners, because we've thrown away novation, haven't we? If you're a designer, that might be a double-edged sword as to whether you're actually retained or not, because you're likely to be working for someone who's got a different set of objectives, certainly commercial objectives, to the person who originally commissioned you in the first place. So there's some real challenges with the way that works. If you decide you want to go to an IPI project, the important thing here that this is an upfront decision. So before you decide what solution you want, you need to pull together an advisory team. You establish what the strategic brief is, a statement of what your needs are and what you want from a high level set of requirements, and a definition of what success means to you, maybe time, maybe quality, maybe target costs, which we would then work with you to validate. So right up front, we have an amount of money that the project can afford, and we use that then to procure the design and the delivery team against this need and the success criteria. And they are all appointed, instead of doing what happens in the traditional environment, to create a solution and add up how much it costs and then say, oh dear, we can't afford it, let's do value engineering, to actually say how much can the client afford to spend, what can they have for that. And that is a very different way of working. So what we do is we select and appoint on the basis of skills and capabilities, on behavioural competencies, and the management resources that they intended to put into the project. The overhead and profit is calculated from the management accounts. We take previous year's management accounts. We pay people what it actually costs them to run their business. And if you're a contracting organisation, what's important here is that we still pay you in relation to your management resource and not the cost of what you buy. So we're all trying to minimise the capital costs, and we pay the overhead and profit to contractors in the same way that we pay it to designers on the basis of the resources that they need to put on the project. Very different way of working, and it causes actually quite a bit of confusion when people first come into contact with it. Maybe a question on that, maybe not. So that our process is about establishing this alliance. We want the client and the alliance partners to sign the contract straight away. We're now committed. You know, one of the problems with early contractual involvement is you're not really committing to people. Here we're signing up to a contract on day one. We then have what we call a commercial alignment period, where everybody understands the commercial arrangements, including what I just went through about how you actually get paid and how you minimise cost. And we do a cultural alignment session. The cultural alignment is very important because the contract includes, and that's a bespoke contract that we've written, which I mean, I use the term bespoke. We hope it will become an industry standard at some point. And what that contract does is it says that you agree to work under a set of alliance principles. So the team sit down, they agree what those alliance principles are. So a bit more, you know, a number of people on this call have probably come across a charter at some point. This is way more powerful than a charter because you agree what those principles are, and you can be chastised and removed from the contract if you fail to follow those principles. The alliance then confirmed that it understands what the functional requirements are. What is this need that we're supposed to be trying to deliver here? Do we all understand what that is? And when they do, then they can start exploring what potential solutions are. We can screen them against the strategic brief. Remember, that's a statement of the needs, the functional requirements of the client and the project, and what the success criteria is. Will it deliver it on time, to budget? Will it win an award if that's what we're supposed to try and do or not? Once we've got to the most appropriate solution, then we can put together the execution and the resource plan that goes with that solution. We agree a gain-pain mechanism, and I'll explain that a little bit later on. And we agree what the target cost is. The process has three experts associated with it. It has an integration facilitator whose role is to nurture the collaborative culture and to keep everybody up to speed on if there are any issues. We have what we call a technical independent risk assurer, a TIRA, who reviews the technical decisions that have been made and shouts if they see any worries. And at the end, will also assist in confirming whether the project is finished or not. And then there's a financial independent risk assurer, a FIRA, who is doing a review and reporting process on the financial performance. If you've worked as a bank monitor or worked with bank monitors, it's that kind of role. Providing those three parties say, when we reach the end of this solution execution and resource plan stage, that yes, the solution's realistic and achievable, it has an appropriate allowance for risk in it, then we will incept the policy. So once the IPI policy is incepted, the whole project is insured for full detailed design and delivery, and that includes the cost overrun. Organisationally, an IPI project looks like this. So we're all focused on the need. How can we deliver that need? And there'll be a number of key partners who form the Alliance board, and they're the ones in the pale blue in the centre. And they could be as far down the supply chain as you need. For example, when I was working at Glaxo, if we were doing a laboratory building, we would have our laboratory furniture manufacturer sat in that alliance group, because that's how important the lab furniture, fume covers, etc. were to the solution. It also ought to include the FM provider, because we're trying to actually make sure that this meets the needs and goes on meeting the needs for a significant period of time in the future. And someone who we would like to call a project integrator, but those skills are a bit devoid in the industry these days, who has the capability to pull the project together on behalf of everybody. We don't have a main contractor, we have a constructor, someone who's going to build, but that does not necessarily mean that they are going to manage everything, and there's certainly not a hierarchical arrangement to do that. The rest of their specialist supporters, designers, specialist contractors and consultants are also brought into the team, but not at Alliance board level. We work with a digital platform day one, because we don't have any problems of PI transfer over. We can have everybody entering into a digital platform. We don't have to worry about who entered what. The insurance is an outturn insurance. It's not a who did what insurance. And we have a back-to-back subcontract for appointing all these specialists and suppliers in exactly the same way. In fact, most of the contracts is referred to the main contract. So you've got to know what target costs you want to try to work to. Well, we know that in the industry, business as usual includes an awful lot of waste and inefficiency. So the first challenge is, how much below the business as usual rate do we think we might be able to get to? And then what we do is we work top down, saying, what will the costs look like to deliver this solution? We allow an amount for opportunity and risk. And we have right at the bottom there, the ring fence sum, which is the overhead and profit for all the organisations. That's the first number that is finalised. And you get that, it doesn't go up and it doesn't go down. So you're incentivised to try to reduce the costs as you go through the project, because your ring fence, your overhead and profit, what you need to run as a business is retained. But even so, there's still a little bit of challenge there about, have we got the right number? And ultimately, the right number, after a little bit of competitive tension, is the number that everybody believes that they can achieve and are prepared to sign up to, and we can get insured. I don't know if there are any questions at this point.
No, okay. Keep going, Kevin.
So, since it's called the Integrated Project Insurance product model, we probably ought to talk about the Integrated Project Insurance that gives it its name. So here are your traditional insurances in the industry. You've got your constructional risks, your contracting insurances, you've got your third-party liabilities, and you've got your professional indemnity insurances. Now, there's a few challenges with professional indemnity insurance, which we're going to get into debate about, but I'll just lay them on the table. The first one is, it's a blame-based insurance, so you have to prove negligence and liability in order to get a payout. That means that immediately there's a problem, you have to find someone to blame. Of course, if you do find a problem, the first thing your underwriter will tell you is, do not admit liability. So now you can't find anybody else to blame, and you're not going to admit that you're to blame. So what you do is you stop talking about the solution and how it could be solved. And actually, all we have to do is now get some kind of legal solution to work out who's to blame before we can get on with solving the problem. And so the whole problem escalates while we're not prepared to accept it and deal with it. There's another little problem with PII, and just to give you an idea, that legal and forensic cost that comes in before we agree how we're going to solve the problem, for every £1 that's paid out on a professional indemnity claim, 5/6 of that is legal and forensic costs. That's how broken the PII process is. So we say, broken process, better get rid of it. First thing we do is we add a latent defects insurance. So we put a 12-year latent defects insurance on the end of our IPI policy. And now that means what we're interested in is the outcome. We don't care who done what, we only care whether it's successful or not. And because we care about whether it's successful, we can insure that outturn for 12 years. We can throw away professional indemnity and we can replace it with a cost overrun insurance. So we're now insuring the overrun of the project, the financial overrun of the project when it's being built, and when it's being finished, we're insuring the latent defects of the project for 12 years. All of that is wrapped into a single umbrella, which is what we call integrated project insurance, and why we gave the model its name, because it is absolutely radical. There is nowhere else in the country or anywhere in the world that's doing that fully wrapped up insurance. The process works over 3 phases. I really talked about phase 1, which is this approval to invest and insure. That's when the clients and the underwriters and the funders are comfortable that the solution that the team has got together with their target cost plan for doing it is realistic and achievable, and we approve it and we accept the policy so that the target cost is now covered. The second phase is development and implementation. So I don't want anybody to think phase 1 is design and phase 2 is delivery. Phase 1 is as much information as is necessary to evaluate whether the risks are realistic and achievable. In some areas, it may have no design done at all. In other areas, it might have a significant amount of design done. It's a transition point at which everybody is comfortable enough to be able to say that this is a real risk and this is a real amount of money to achieve this solution. But phase 2 is development and implementation, all the detailed design, all the delivery, all the way through to proving, testing, and operation. And then phase 3 is the operational phase. That's when we have a fairly conventional 12-month defects rectification period, but actually we could make that any period we want. You know, I liked the idea of PFI, where projects would be looked after for 25 years. It's just a shame that people saw it as an opportunity to sell the project a year after it was finished, and we lost that whole potential for change in the industry. During that 12-month period, we do fairly conventional stuff. We maintain soft landings all the way through, and we continue that into the 12 months, and we also do seasonal commissioning, etc. But it's a lot more hand-holding than you would usually expect on a project. People haven't just disappeared into the shadows. So when we get to the end of the project, there's a couple of potential outcomes. So that was our original target cost plan model. So there's a positive outcome, which is we've managed to maintain the actual costs within the forecasts. What's more, we've achieved an awful lot of opportunities and mitigated the majority of the risks, and there's a gain share. And that gain share is distributed in accordance with the gain and pain share sums that were agreed up front. And that is different amounts to each organisation. What's important is whatever percentage of gain share you take, you will take the same percentage of pain share. We don't have any, we take all the gain share, somebody takes all the pain share. You take 10% of the gain share, you carry 10% of the pain share with it. And then the negative is actually we haven't been able to manage all these costs below the target costs. What's more, we haven't been able to mitigate all the risks and achieve the opportunities, and we've got an overspend situation. Now the overspend, it becomes the policy excess, and it's a maximum amount. So everybody knows what their liability is on the project before we run into the insured cost overrun. Just to give you some numbers, if we had a £10 million-ish project, your target cost would be 10 million, your pain share would probably be £500,000, and the insured cost would be another 2 to 2.5 million. So, you know, 25 to 30% overspend on a project being insured is a pretty significant amount of money, and certainly enough to be able to change people's behaviours. I don't know how many people work on projects where you know your liability up front, but you know, this one you do. I've got 4 more slides. I can see a question. Something's arrived on the chat. Oh no, just say please.
No, that's just me. That's just me getting a prompt, Kevin.
So we've successfully achieved 3 projects, which is not great considering we got this listed in the government construction strategy in 2016, but it does demonstrate just how radical it is, how difficult it is to get people to do wholesale change. So the first one, Dudley Advance 2, we had an investment target, and when we agreed the target cost, we very early on moved 6.5% of the target cost into the investment target to be spent on FF&E equipment. So we were able to bring this in 6.5% less than the amount of money that the client had put aside in the first place, which is not bad on the first trial. We did, however, not beat the target cost that we then ended up with agreeing. And the main reason we didn't do that is because we couldn't stop people carrying on doing the best that they possibly could, even though it was their own money that they were spending. But we ended up with an overspend of about 1.8%, which is 180k on what was it, 11.7 million, which for most people on most projects is a pretty good minimum. Great facility, high-tech facility, and right in the centre of your screen, I think you can probably see my mouse if I put it on it, is a hangar in which Dudley College train people into how to build MMC solutions, so they can take modules in there and stack them. And there's a wall on the left-hand side where they've got a whole series of drainage that runs all the way from above ground to below ground to teach students how to install drainage above and below ground without having to go into below ground. It won the CE Integration Collaborative Working Award in 2018, both the regional one and the national one. Next project was finished in early part of this year. Suffered terribly from COVID, as I'm sure lots of people's projects did. It's a refurb. We deliberately tried to do a different style of project second time round. So the project had already had design done on it, but the client absolutely believed in what they call cooperative design, and they were ready made to do a genuinely collaborative project. So we did convert the design team with the agreement of the Heritage Fund, who funded this project together with the Arts Council, and it wasn't ideal. We have confirmed to ourselves that doing a project from scratch with the whole team is still the best way to do it, but we successfully were able to deliver this project, which I think you can see is an extremely high quality project. Again, we didn't manage to do this with inside the budget. But that said, we had an enormous amount of COVID costs, some of which the Heritage Fund funded, 2 floods, more asbestos than we possibly could have imagined, despite asbestos surveys saying that there wasn't any, and a way leave that we couldn't get agreement for right adjacent to this is a substation for the local authority. Despite all of that, it's a great project, and we've just received 5 awards at CE Regional, the 5th one being winner of winners, which feels a bit pompous to write down there, so I didn't. And the Construction News Award just last week. National finals are in January, so that'll be interesting to see what happens there. Our 3rd project finished last month. This is one of the new institutes of technology that were funded by DFE. And as you can see, it's a pretty impressive building. It's even more impressive when you hear that we are inside the DFE minimum benchmarks. The DFE didn't want to do a benchmark that funded any more for this Institute of Technology than they did for a conventional educational facility. And yet we've managed to produce an extremely high quality facility, and we have done it inside the timeline, and we have done it inside the target costs, and there will be gain share being paid out on this project. We haven't done the final settlement of that yet, so I can't tell you much that is. And it won the Integration Collaborative Working Award just 2 weeks ago. So the national final should be fun in January. Now I've highlighted the awards for a reason, not because we set out to try to win awards. We didn't. It's nice to win awards and it gets your profile raised. We set out to try to fundamentally change the industry, and I am certainly not satisfied with 3 award-winning projects. I want this industry to be able to do that on every project, so that everybody who wants to stay in construction and get as much out of it as I have cannot have to do it despite it being so hard work and so painful and so litigious. But I've got a question for you. So I don't know if you've got questions for me. I've got one for you, which is, how on earth do we increase the uptake so we can all benefit, given that this is so radical and requires organisations to change so many different aspects of what they do to pick it up? So that's all I'm going to say. I will stop sharing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kevin.
And join you on screen. Now's a good
Excellent.
time for faces.
Well, I'll start off. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for a great presentation. It's a fascinating area in terms of, and we've had conversations in the past about how you end on that question about how you get people to change. It's, we talked about some time ago the so what, so can we do this and all those elements to it. Of the 4 projects you've done so far, how did you convince clients and other people to actually, put into your process and the IPI model their projects? Were they, when we did our project, the clients that we had struggled because they'd been in the construction process before, lost lots of money and just wanted to do something completely different. And that client was then almost ready made to kind of say, well, there is a different way of doing it. Let's talk about it, let's collaborate, and let's kind of put the team together. Can you just say a bit about the kind of, for each of those kind of 4 projects, how that kind of happened for you in terms of putting those projects together and where the drives came for that? Okay, so first project, Dudley College have been putting together what they call the Learning Quarter in Dudley, and they had done 4 previous design and build projects, and to quote Lowell Williams, who was the chief exec at the time, they'd been in litigation with every single one of them and had just convinced themselves that there's no point in doing building if it has to be done like this. So they were absolutely desperate to try to find something else, and IPI was suggested to them by one of their design community who said, yeah, have you seen this? And I have to say, without the bravery of them and also their experience that told them that there's almost nowhere else for them to go, it was almost backs to the wall. We've got another project that we have to do, and we really can't see how we can hand it over to this process that we've been using. We probably wouldn't have got off the ground at all. The third project, IOTT, is also for Dudley College, and although you mentioned 4, I've only talked about 3. Our potential 4th project in the pipeline is Dudley College. So what it demonstrates is, once you've shown someone the fundamental change, they don't want to do anything else. They've said to us, how can we do, we keep talking about something called IPI Light. You and I have talked about it, Richard. Yeah. How can we make this process, which is really a medium, large scale process, work on small projects? And they would love us to solve that problem so they can just do all their projects that way. The Museum of Making, I think I illustrated, they have this co-production philosophy. Their principle for the museum was that they want it to be developed, assembled and run by themselves with their volunteer community in Derby, and they had experience of doing a bit of a first phase using a traditional approach, and they said we had no idea what was going on or how much it was going to cost or what solution we were going to get, and they were terrified of the industry until somebody said, have you seen this? And it just rang, it sang to them, this is the way that they work, and they wanted to work with it. Got to say that the lottery fund, the Heritage Fund, have been absolutely brilliant in looking at it and embracing how it works. And there's some,
you can imagine we've been working on this since, well, I've been working on this since 1980 something, but IPI specifically, we formed our company in 2011. It takes an awful long time to get this gestation right. But those people who've got the right cultural mindset just drop into it. And our challenge is every time, so you're sitting there thinking, well, this is wonderful. Why have you only had three projects and, you know, another one on the pipeline? But the problem is the old perfect storm. Whoever you talk to, they get it, but they've got to go away and explain it to their boss, who explains it to their boss. And unless you get a perfect storm of all the people in an organization going, yes, we're ready for change, you can't adopt it. It's so easy to say, no, why are we doing it like that? I mean, we met with Sport England, and we had an absolutely fantastic discussion with Sport England. And they fell over themselves. You can imagine the team ethos was just completely aligned. And we had a follow-up meeting a week later, and the guy opened his mouth, and I'm telling you, I heard his finance director speaking. He didn't say anything like he said the first time around. They'd just gone, and it just got, you know, where's the guarantees, you know, as if two-stage design and construct is a guarantee when 70% of projects are overspent and 3/4 of them are late, you know. But people have this, they have this ludicrous tie into an apparent guarantee, don't they? People want a price that's certain. You know, we've never had a certain price. Anybody worked on a project with a certain price? Put your hands up. No, I don't see any hands going up.
No. I mean, I guess the other, in terms of when you talk about perfect storm, the other challenge that we're all facing, and it's better to kind of touch on this one now, is PI insurance is generally, I mean, the industry at the moment is just in an absolute mess. Yeah. And as a consultant, as an architect, our PI insurance year on year now is going up. Yeah. You know, we are very particular now of things we can comment upon or not comment upon. Fire strategies, those elements to it are almost taboo, and you have to kind of back yourself out of the design element to that. And other consultants, not necessarily architects, their PIs are going up by astronomical figures. You know, there are some practices paying, you know, 3 figures and more in terms of their PI insurance. Yeah. So I guess your model, you know, I guess we're looking at it now in terms of that we have to do something differently, because the consultants won't be around from our perspective because we can't afford to be in business. Yeah. You know, is there some learnings from, you know, in terms of your, and obviously the projects you've done, the 3 that you are kind of completed, you know, they've finished, they're successful. You know, from a PI perspective, there's no claims running to those because you've achieved the kind of ultimates of what. So from a PI perspective, they're sitting, I guess, happy because, you know, apart from the latent defect parts to it, they're through that process. There's no claims at the end of the project to kind of deal with. Well, from a PI point of view, 2 of those projects didn't have PI. Quite simply, you just, so if you're working on Advanced 2 or IOTT, you simply excluded the cost of the project from your PI renewal because you're not insured. You don't need to be insured. The project has a no claim clause in the contract, so you can't make a claim. Well, that immediately makes it hard to get anything out of PI. But we have an alternative insurance that covers the financial outcome. So you stop your PI insurance. And those sitting there thinking you can't do that, yes, you can. I'll give you a broker who will get it done for you. It's just same as if you're a contracting organisation, except one of you looks forward and one of you looks back. All you do is just remove it from your turnover, and you don't have to pay the cost of the insurance on your turnover. The Museum of Making, we lost our ability to provide the latent defects insurance because it was a refurb, and the value of the refurbishment was not significant enough compared to the value of the retained building for us to be able to offer the latent defects insurance. Essentially, a latent defects insurance takes over all the risks of the building, and that meant that they would have to take over all the residual risks of the building that have been there. You know, let's be honest, this is a site that's 300 years old. It's a site of the world's first manufacturing facility. And even this latest iteration of the building was 100 years old from when the last one burnt down.
So that's a lot of responsibility. So we did have to retain PI, but what we did was we applied the same principles with the PI to say that you could only make a claim in the event that one, the project was overspent, or two, that a latent defect arose. And the PI insurers actually acknowledged that that reduced the risk on the project. I should just, while we're talking about PI, tell you about the nightmare of Advance 2. Getting Advance 2 finished took us 3 months longer than it should have done, because we were right in the aftermath of Grenville Tower. I mean, the building control officer, it was just like a rabbit in the headlights as we were trying to get him to agree a building, and there were people in the background talking about whether they were going to sue building control for Grenville Tower. So we actually had one part of this building has got a stairwell with an hour's firewall inside, an hour's firewall outside, intumescently painted steelwork making up the inside of it, and he insisted that we filled the spaces with a loose infill. So it's got a 3.5 hour firewall around it.
Wow, it's almost a bunker.
And those are the kind of hurdles that we had to jump through before we eventually got building control sign off after 3 months. So whilst I, share your commiserations with you PI guys, it's not just the PI environment that we're suffering from with this litigious, frightened mindset. And I feel for people in, building control at the moment, where they're trying to understand what their liabilities are as well.
And I think it's also the interface with the end insurers in terms of the client operating their buildings. The insurance now, they get heavily involved in the process, and the fire engineers are talking. So it's a real mix of stuff in terms of the end user, the design side and the construct side. What's
been really interesting, our journey with the underwriters, is when we first approached them with integrated project insurance product, they didn't really understand why it was going to be beneficial for them. It took us 2 or 3 meetings for them to suddenly realize that working under this form of alliancing, they would understand who the team was and how they interacted with each other and what the relationships were like. And the penny dropped that when they're insuring under PII, they have no idea about any of the projects that are being done. All they're actually doing is ensuring the claims record of an organization. It's got nothing whatsoever to do with the projects. So you're right that we're seeing a bit of a transition where people are starting to go, hold on, I need to understand this project. I think that's good. I think it means that the mindset shift that actually we need project insurance is probably beginning to happen. I mean, there's you can get what's called owner controlled insurance programs or contractor owned insurance programs, which cover the whole team. They don't cover design and construction at the moment. You can get a PI version or you can get a construction version. And obviously what we've got is very unique, but you can get those single insurances. And I think there is potentially a move that this industry might make and might have to make into project insurance. You can imagine that, I mean, you were talking about PI numbers. I know organizations whose PI has gone up by 5,000%.
Wow.
It's just laughable. I know an organization who's paying 5% of their turnover in PI at the moment. It's just absolutely ridiculous what's happening. But a project insurance where actually you're properly assessing the risks on the project, well, there's maybe some room for a transition of PI there. And that wouldn't be hurtful for us because it put us right in the right environment. And I mean, I don't know where we're going with the PI market. If anybody else knows better, please shout.
Any market, CO2 market's the next one, isn't it? Yeah. Any other question? Any questions from anybody else? I'm conscious I'm just chatting away with Kevin here. Nothing's appeared in the chat. So any other questions from anybody else?
Was it nonsense? Is this bloke a lunatic?
I wouldn't say so.
I'll have a quick word. Thank you, Kevin. It was interesting. I apologise. I did have to take a phone call, and I hope it wasn't a critical stage, so my question might have already been answered. But what I'm trying to get my head around is that you showed us that chart with the positive outcome and the negative outcome, and sort of implicit in that was that realization of whether it had been positive or negative was at completion of the project, because obviously there'd been no claims on contractors all risk or public liability, or to that point PI. But of course, as you mentioned about latent defects, that sword of Damocles hangs over us for 12 years afterwards. So who's actually underwriting that risk in relation to a project that then goes on for another 12 years? Because without that, then effectively you haven't got that latent defect insurance.
So we've got a latent defects insurance that is handed over to the client. The team's responsibility is terminated. It's the client's insurance.
Right. Okay. If I missed
so
that,
there's no recourse to the team under the latent defects insurance. So maybe I didn't get. There is no right to subrogation. Even if you make a claim on any of these insurances, the underwriters cannot go after a single member of these team. So when I look at those gain and pain share outcomes, they're not about insurance claims. The insurance claims are irrelevant. There aren't claims. That's just the excess on the policy. That's all that gain share is. That's the only thing that a team is liable for. And only if that excess is fully paid out is a team liable for that full overspend.
Thank you. Any more questions? What other projects you got coming up then, Kevin?
Well,
what are the ones that are in the pipeline? You got one in the pipeline. Do you expect a flood of projects coming forward in the next 12 to 18 months?
Who knows? I've been expecting a flood of projects ever since we first did this. I mean, when we finished Advanced 2, I thought, that's it. We've demonstrated the bleeding obvious. Now we'll get loads of projects. There's a lot of interest at this particular moment in time. I think there are a lot of things have sparked people's imagination, including the playbook, or rather maybe what the playbook doesn't say, including the PI situation, you know, the experiences that lots of organizations, particularly lots of clients, have gone through the COVID scenario. So up at the Museum of Making, this team, within 2 weeks of COVID, had put together what we felt was an appropriate additional budget to support the project through to the end. Went to the Heritage, went to the Lottery Fund, and the Heritage Fund paid that out. We're the only project that received any additional funding. Everybody else is still trying to work out how much it is. That's what this process does. The visibility, the transparency, the ability to be able to manage and change. So when we went to them, so our starting point was, we've got a project. We think it's going to cost another £1 million to deliver through COVID. So what do you want us to do? Do you want us to just reduce what you can get for the £1 million, or do you want to fund the extra £1 million? Contracts can't normally do that, but that's what we're able to do. So, you know, when the IOTT project 6 months ago, it was showing a £1.5 million overspend, and 2 months late, and the team just pulled together what they called the disaster recovery group, who worked out what they were going to do to the solution that they had in place to deliver it earlier and at £1.5 million less. And it looks like we're going to be actually £200,000 inside that.
Wow.
It's just fantastic what it's capable of doing. What our industry is capable of doing when you unlock them to actually do it, instead of spending your entire time fighting and arguing and trying to protect a corner because your own contract or your own insurance tells you that's what you have to do. It's just fantastic. And yeah, Richard, I am frustrated that I can't reel out a list of projects that we're doing, but I can tell you that we're having a lot of discussion with the lottery, with the Heritage Fund. I keep wanting to call them the Heritage Lottery Fund, but they want to call themselves the Heritage Fund these days. So having a lot of discussion with the Heritage Fund, as well as 4 or 5 other key clients who've crept out the woodwork in the last couple of weeks.
Good. Any other questions?
Yeah, just one, or an observation from me. Hi, Kevin.
Hi.
Just one of the questions you asked at the end of your presentation was about, well, how do we get this to the bigger market? As an example, we're seeing sort of with the larger green agenda that's out there at the moment, a lot of that in terms of clients' first port of call when typically they're getting a project going is funding, and secondly insurance cover and contracts and such like. We're seeing, especially in the kind of sector that we work in, that the green agenda is being pushed by the fund. So incentivizing clients to utilize sort of green technology, look at CO2 and carbon reduction strategies that they are willing to forward fund. So is that not an opportunity? Obviously the insurance market has an incentive by the sounds of it in terms of to de-risk the process. So surely they, alongside project funders, because they seem to be the first point of call for clients, should be the target audience for this kind of alternate route.
Okay, right, I've got 2 questions I can respond to out of that. So Advance 2 was naturally ventilated with a thermal adaptive tab system in the building. It's the sort of thing that people would love to put in their designs, and often do. They go out to tender and people don't understand them, so they price it out even though it's cheaper, and then you don't get it. You know, how many passive house buildings actually get themselves built after you've gone through the bid process? So we were actually able to build it. As a result, the Advance 2 building sits next to a sister building, Advance 1, and runs for 50% of the electrical energy. Advance 2, IOTT, we expect will be even better. It's just been finished, so yeah, I can't brag about the numbers yet. But I mean, it's just what you're capable of doing when the whole team are committed to that green agenda is just fantastic. Unfortunately, up the chain, green's just one of those boxes you've got to tick. So if you tick the green box, but you haven't got a certainty of cost, even though a target cost that's insured seemed pretty certain to me, it's beyond me, really. After nearly 10 years now of trying to talk to people and explain why the process that we use is completely mad, and here's a different process, I still find it hard to believe that really we've only got 2 clients, one who's done it before and one who's never going to do it again. It's not because the project didn't go well, it's because they're not going to have another silk mill to build, you know. Yep. So it's it's terribly frustrating, and you know, sometimes I feel a bit like a climate change activist, although not the ones. I've never thought about lying down in the M25.
Yeah.
There's been as much information as you could possibly want to know about the problems with the climate, and we're still paying lip service to it, aren't we? You know, we've got successive governments saying, oh, it's just we've got to be completely carbon neutral by 2025 or 30, whatever it is. When you actually explore how far you are down the path, we're about 3%. You know, we're never going to get anywhere near it. BIM. So we're all doing BIM. Everybody's doing a different type of BIM. Nobody's really doing BIM as it was envisaged 10 years ago. We have an appalling set of behaviours around actually not doing anything new, and this is another example of that. But the good news is that we will get clients and they will get success out of it. The bad news is that I just won't be able to give people like you the opportunity to be able to benefit from this and enjoy the experience. You know, you have to go back to your 2-stage design and construct and bang your head against the wall until it's as flat as morning. Sorry about that. But I mean, if you've got a client who's at that desperation stage, there are a growing number of clients who are in I'm not doing this again unless I do it differently stage. We'll come and talk to them. Very happy to do that.
Good. Okay.
Kevin, I've got another question if you're happy to take them. I see there's 20 participants. I don't know where they all are, and it shouldn't all be me asking questions, but at the risk of unpicking the integrated part of what you're offering, I mean, is it possible to get a latent defects insurance as the starting point? Because I think then you'd get all architects and engineers right behind you straight away. And if then you could offer the added value of integrating the other aspects, the all risks and so on, just to say, well, it can be even better if you take that on board. It feels to me as though the starting point is to reverse engineer it from the fact that everybody's having a nightmare of PI, and the fact that it is that latent defects fear over 12 years that's sort of driving everybody mad at the moment. And if you could solve that one, then the other ones might just drop into place.
Okay, so couple of observations of that. You can get latent defects covered today. It's a standard industry product, but it's driven by damage. So the latent defects that you can buy in the marketplace is a damage insurance. If there's damage, everything will be covered, all the design fees, everything associated with it. What you can't get is a latent defects insurance that covers, we didn't give you what we promised we would give you, which is what PI is all about. What we do is we sign a closed loop. So we start with what is the purpose, and then we sign off that the project has met the purpose. So we close the loop off. So if people are offering things that aren't appropriate, they don't get through to completion. We don't accept it at completion. So that we close it off. But we have a hole in that if you really did allow the team collectively do something stupid, our latent defects insurance won't pick it up any better than anybody else's will. So we are looking with latent defects insurers to see if we can get what you might call a post-project PI that covers that design related aspects. And not surprisingly, they're not particularly keen at the moment, but we've got, you know, people are talking to us because the fact of the matter is we've done 3 projects now, never got anywhere near a claim. That you know, that begins to pick up the interest of the underwriters. They love insuring things that aren't going to be necessary, and you know, who will blame them? I remember a broker saying to me once, don't think I'm going to insure you for things you need. It's my job to insure you for things you don't need. I saw a question.
So the question therefore, I think it's from Mick. Yeah. So it's a question of whether do you think that this could be applied to housing developments?
Yeah. So there's some limitations. The process that I described is I've just got to write myself a note. Don't let me forget to tell you about insurances and who they're for. Insurances.
Okay, we've probably got about 5 minutes then, Kevin, just
okay.
to tie these as the last 2 points then. So
insurances, housing, yes, absolutely. It's quite a top-heavy process. You know, you've got an alliance board, you've got third-party facilitators, technical experts, and we work through this alliance board with an integrated project team working underneath. It's not a small project process. So you need something of a scale of 10 million plus really to make it viable. Otherwise, it's a bit top heavy. You can do it smaller projects, but it would be top heavy, and I don't think people will want to pay the money for that. As to what the project is, not a problem. In fact, the more complex and technically difficult it is, the better, to be honest. Housing doesn't really fall into that highly complex and technical, but it does fall into large scale usually and large repeatability. So yeah, there's no reason why not. Infrastructure is a bit harder because of the long gestation periods that go with it. You know, if you're trying to do a rail project, for example, having all those people together for a long period of time and you've got to go through 3 public inquiries doesn't really work. So there are some limitations. And one thing I didn't say about insurance, but it's just worth reminding us that all these different insurances that everybody's got, you know, they're not for your client, they're for you, aren't they? Clients need to remember that. Whereas the IPI insurance is for everybody, including the client. So I'm just going to throw that in as a reminder of it.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for your presentation. Thanks for the conversation as well. It's brilliant. It's great to see you again. Just before we conclude, a couple of things. Get in contact with us if you would like a CPD certificate for today's presentation, which we can arrange for you. Also, get in contact with us as well if you want to become members of the Herts and Beds Club. We are relaunching it, as you know. We're gaining momentum with it, so it would be great to get some membership elements sorted, which we're starting to do over the next few months. And then the final one is just to plug. We're very fortunate enough to, I think, be arranging a building visit. So the second week well, I think it's early November, the second week in November. So we got an invitation to go to the Enterprise Hub building at the University of Hertfordshire, which has just recently won the Constructing Excellence Project of the Year this year as a regional winner. So that will be a really good visit. So look out for that. We'll just about to confirm the dates and arrangements for that. And it'd be nice actually to see everybody face to face as well as online. And that gives me a great pleasure to say again, thank you to Kevin, and also thank you to Rachel at Hertfordshire Building Control for hosting today's presentation as well. And that's it, unless anyone's got any other questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.